One of the features that I consistently underutilize in Airtable is synced tables. Synced tables are tables that are within your base, but the data in those tables is coming from other data sources. Those other data sources might be things like your Google Calendar or Google Drive, or even other tables within other bases in your workspace. Now, you can't edit the data in those synced tables, but you can add to them and even link them to other records within your base. So they can be incredibly helpful and improve the efficiency of a lot of your workflows. So that's why I want to cover synced tables here in this video. So let's jump into Airtable so you can see what they are and what some examples might be of synced tables. If you don't know me, I'm Matt Garrett and I help non-technical creators innovate and operate well. As I mentioned, we're going to be covering Airtable Synced Tables in this video and showing you a few examples. Those few examples are going to be one, a Google Calendar sync table. The second one is going to be connecting a synced table from another base. And the third one is going to be connecting a Google Drive folder as a synced table. Now with that, let's jump into Airtable itself and show you those three examples. To get started with synced tables, what you want to do is go up to here and add a table. Now, once you click it, right, you see all these different options, and I'm on the pro version of Airtable, so I don't have these enterprise options, but in this case, I don't need those. All I need is the sync data from, and this is what creates sync tables. So for this example, we're connecting a Google Calendar to it. So I'll select Google Calendar, and I want to select the Google Calendar that I've already pre-connected here. So I'll select that one. And then you have to select which Google Calendar you want it to sync from. So in this case, I want to sync from my Airtable YouTube here, just the example one. And this feature, the sync range start and end time, this can be really helpful, but in this case, it's not really that big of a deal. So I'm just gonna put the start time as today and the end date as, just like maybe till the end of the year here. So I'll hit next. And this is really just a personal preference. So I always do all the fields in the sources and fields because you can always hide fields in Airtable. That's pretty easy. But if you're like, hey, I don't need all those data, I'll just keep it really clean. You can just pick which fields you want to add to Airtable. So I'll select all fields again, because it doesn't really bother me. Go to next. I'm going to keep the default settings here for the sync changes. You can change these, but for me, and for most people, I think you just need the default settings. They work pretty well. All right, so we'll hit create table. And here is the really beautiful part. You can see here's all the data from the Google Calendar from Airtable YouTube here. Again, these are just example events that I have. And you can see them as a spreadsheet essentially, right? And there's a grid view here in Airtable, which is really helpful if you're more of like a spreadsheet person, like I am a little bit. So I can see things and see what's going on. Now, the nice part is that there's this calendar view as well. This is the power of views in Airtable, and I can see really quickly what's happening. Again, I only put these events for the week just because we're just using this as an example. Now, if you want to, why is this really helpful for using this particular sync? Well, if you looked at my last video about Airtable automations, we talked about creating, interview times and these different emails and automatic interview, calendar invites. What you could do is that with it being within Airtable, right? If you're sending interview start time and end times, and hey, this is, maybe this is like the common, group calendar who's going to be doing interviews. You can, instead of, going to all those Google calendars and giving yourself a bunch of clicks, you could just have the calendar living here in Airtable, be able to look at that really quickly saying, hey, there's a time slot available at 1 o'clock or whatever it might be, and then go back to here in applicants and pick those times. You don't have to scramble around and see where everyone has availability and whatnot because everything is, again, all in Airtable. That's really, really helpful. Now, what you could do too is if maybe you're not doing an interview process, you could maybe, kind of measure how many meetings are we having for product, how many meetings are we having for marketing, or even be able to measure, what types of marketing events are we doing consistently and what's working. Or you can even view them differently with colors and whatnot. So you could color based on the conditions. So if title contains product and I want it to color it blue, so you can see it turns blue because product meeting has product within it. So if you want to see your calendar in that way, that might be really helpful. For some people, it's not very helpful at all. And you also can filter as well. So you could create, in theory, right, a marketing view, a product view, whatever it might be. This is a really powerful tool. It's still the same calendar in GCal. It's not editing the GCal, but you can view it differently and be able to add on to it here within Airtable. So that's really, really nice. Okay, so now that we've done that, I've showed you this Google Calendar sync table. Let's move on to this next example, which is synced tables from other bases. So again, like I mentioned in my last video, we could, we have this interview process that we've been running within these examples. And one thing that I kind of hinted at in the last video was about locations. Now, because what we're doing here, right, if we're sending a calendar invite, here the locations are going to be consistently. It's either going to be in our like one of our offices, or it's going to be through a Zoom link, and that Zoom link is already going to be preloaded, or maybe preloaded within the automation. But let's say if the locations are changing all the time, we want to be able to pull the locations from our offices somewhere within Airtable. So those locations I have in a different base within Airtable. So again, we're going to go to create this sync table. We're going to go hit the add table. And instead of a Google Calendar like we did last time, we want to sync data from a different Airtable base. So I'll select Airtable base, and I just put it within here in this sync tables YouTube. Now, one thing that you do need to keep in mind within these sync tables is that all the tables that you're going to be syncing need to have a shareability to them. So if you go to a shared link, you actually see an option to say, do you want this to be able to sync to other bases within Airtable? You want to make sure you click that or just turn that on so that's available. If you for some reason forgot or just didn't allow that just yet, you can always change it and actually create it within this process for creating sync tables. So it's not a big deal if you forgot, but you do need to allow tables to be able to sync to other bases. Okay, let's get back into this. So here, select table. I've already made it syncable, so I'll pick locations. I'll select the view, which is a grid view. Now this can be really, this view part of it can be really helpful, because let's say you have like maybe it's a whole bunch, like you have 100 different locations you could potentially interview at. Most people probably don't in this case, but let's say you do have 100 potential locations, you could filter like by states or by cities, whatever it might be. You can create filterable views, so you're not getting every single potential location when you're pulling it up. You can maybe just show like, hey, these are the spots we only interview at in this case. So in this case, I only have one example, like one view. So I'm just going to go with that one, hit next. And again, you can pick which fields you want to sync. Again, I just always pick the all fields because you can always hide the fields later. All right, going with the default settings, and I will create the table. All right, so here you can see the offices of where we can interview with these candidates. So this is really helpful because one, you don't have to re-enter all this data again. It's all right here. And as that data, maybe like you change offices in, White Plains, you move to a different building and it gets updated in that base, that data is going to get updated here as well. So you're creating just a one-stop shop for everything. And as information is moving and updating, it's updating everywhere. So that's really, really powerful. The one downside is that you can't edit. It's not a two-way street in terms of communication. It's only a one-way street. So in this sync table, I can't edit, what city it is, and it shows you can't be edited, but I can add to it. So maybe like, hey, this is an interview spot for product teams. So what I could do is create a multiple select, type of interview, and put product, and do marketing and operations. Keep it really simple, right? And so what I could do is like, hey, this location's a good one for product, this one's good for marketing, and you can add to it. So like these fields, name, street address, city, state, zip code, that's the sync data. But after that, it's all editable and you can change things up and add to it. So that's really nice. And just like I talked about in the Google Calendar sync table, where you can view it in different ways. We have this grid view and we have this calendar view. You can do the same thing with this view, right? You could have, just like we're talking about types of interviews, you could have another view that shows just the product ones and just the product, like in the marketing areas, or you can even do it by like state. So maybe, hey, this is where all the New York offices are or where the Georgia office is. So really, really nice. And being able to, hey, here's this base data that we want to use, but maybe we're going to add to it and make it different in terms of views and how we process it. So it's really nice to have this sync data where you can't edit it, but you can add on to it. So that way you can view it differently and use it more effectively within your particular use case for that particular base. All right, let's move on to this next example. and that is connecting a Google Drive folder and syncing that as a table within Airtable. For this last example, we're going to be using a different use case. Instead of using the use case of job interviews and being able to send interview requests, we're going to be using a use case of social media posts. And why we're doing that is because we're going to be connecting a Google Drive folder and using that as a synced table within Airtable. So let's go back into Airtable so I can show you what this might look like. So as you can see here in this table for social media posts, I made it really simple. I just have the name of the post, a status, and the platform that's going to be going on, and notes. And what I want to do is actually put that content within the actual graphics and the videos that are going to be posted and put them into Airtable. But I also already have them in Google Drive. That's where we're storing all of our content and like the raw content. But I want to be able to pick and choose which content comes into Airtable and how to connect it to our current production process for social media posts. So that's why we're connecting Google Drive and Airtable. So what I'm going to do is to get started is again create a table. And here it doesn't show Google Drive right away. You have to go into more and hit Google Drive. And I'll select my Google Drive account that I pre-connected. I'll select this, and then you want to pick which root folder it's in. So what I'll do is go here. I've already made a sample post or sample folder here. I'll select the folder, and I want to sync those folders. So hit next, all the fields, and just the default settings, and I'll create a table. So this is really cool, right? So you can see here's all the different posts or all the different files that are in the Google Drive folder. I can see when they were created, when they were last viewed, last modified, what kind of file type they are, like how big the file is, a link, the Google Drive folder link to it. It's really awesome, like what's in there. And also I can see what that content actually looks like. So why is this really helpful? Well, because we can create linked records for this Google Drive. So let's go back to the social media post, and link records are really powerful because it links different records together. So it's two different records, but they're talking together and they're synced in themselves. So what I'll do is go back to here, create a link to another record, and go to Airtable YouTube 2. So I'll allow linking to multiple records. It doesn't make a big difference in this case, and create a field. Now, lookup fields are essentially what they are is like what other fields of that linked record do you want to pull into that particular table. In this case, I really just want the thumbnail because I want to be able to see what this file actually looks like. Now, this can be helpful for a lot of different automations, but we're not going to get into that in this video. If you want to learn about automations, check out the last video about Airtable automations. I'll put the link in the description below. But for this purpose, I'm just going to pick again thumbnail. Now that we have the records linked, now we want to actually select which content pieces from this Google Drive folder we want to connect to our social media scheduling process. So what I'll do here is go back to social media post, and here's the really powerful part is that when you hit this plus button, it'll pull up all the different files that are in that Google Drive folder. So right now, let's say you are currently going to Google Drive, looking up all the folders, copying, pasting the share link and putting it into Airtable. If you're using Airtable for your production process, you don't need to do that anymore. All you have to do is sync the Google Drive folder to Airtable, and then you can see right here is right. I can see all the files in that folder. And for this one, right, I'm just gonna pick, hey, I want this image, and I can see this is all right here. So if I can even expand it what it looks like, and you can download it right from Airtable. So like we've talked about a lot in these Airtable videos is that you want to try to create as much of it within one place. You don't want to be able to, say like, hey, we have things in Google Drive and we have to go to our email here and then we have to go to Airtable again. Like that's a lot of clicks, and every single click that you have is adding a lot of time. So what I'm trying to do here, and especially with synced tables, is create less clicks and create everything in one place. So as you can see here, everything is nice and synced. I can see here's the actual the graphics here. I can see what the post is going to be, and you can get really complicated with this really quickly. You can have like the title, the description, what platform is going to be going on, even the different types. Let's say you're creating a YouTube video and then reusing that for different purposes. You're taking different clips of that YouTube video and then you're going to post it on TikTok or Instagram, different version of that. You can have all those different content pieces within one record here, right? Because here's where like having multiple records available is like if I hit again a plus, I'll say I'm going to add this logo in there too. It adds multiple things in there. So that can be a really powerful feature of synced tables within Airtable. So that's the basics of Airtable Synced Tables. Now, we just went over some really easy examples to show you the ropes, but they can get really powerful really quickly, especially if you go in depth with these synced tables. Now, if you're on the pro version of Airtable, you can get most of the tools, but if you're on the enterprise version, you also get Salesforce and create synced tables with Salesforce. That can be really helpful if you're using Salesforce as a CRM, because you can connect your different clients to different content pieces, and probably a bunch of other ways to use Salesforce and Airtable together. Now, if this video was helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like and even subscribe to the channel if you're finding this content helpful.